Welcome back to the France 24 Newsroom in Paris. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Thank you very much for joining us. First, foreign ministers of Arab League nations are gathered in Cairo for an emergency meeting to discuss how best to respond to the US President Donald Trump's decision to recognise Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. Well, it's a move which has triggered 3 consecutive days of angry protests in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It's also sparked international condemnation. Well, aside from a statement, it isn't clear what concrete measures the Arab League member states will announce. But arriving at that meeting in Cairo, the foreign minister of the Palestinian authorities, Riyad al-Maliki, said that President Trump's announcement disqualifies the United States from any involvement in the peace process.
Trump's decision to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel disqualifies the US from its long-standing role as broker in a peace deal.
Foreign Minister of the Palestinian Authorities speaking there. A little earlier on, I caught up with the Times correspondent in Cairo, Belle True. She had this update on what's being discussed there this evening.
Little concrete action was expected from the meeting, but the strongest message probably came from Lebanon's foreign minister, who called for preemptive measures, to use his words. He said that should begin with diplomatic measures, then be escalated to political and possibly economic sanctions, but he didn't develop that message. Arab League head Ahmed Abul-Gheit called for the world to recognise East Jerusalem as Palestine's capital and said, echoing the Palestinian foreign minister's words, the shift in US policy undermines Arab confidence in Trump's administration's ability to be able to be a mediator. So that was really a key message from the meeting, that they don't believe that the states can take a position trying to mediate in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The Palestinian foreign minister also called for the UN Security Council to take action, but again didn't specify what exactly wanted to happen. Sameh Shoukry, Egypt's foreign minister, sort of summed up the sentiment. He warned, and to use his own words, that the region was on the verge of an explosion. And that, I think, means that there'll probably likely be further meetings in the future if they need to take further, more concrete action.
The Times correspondent in Cairo, Belle True, speaking to me a little earlier on. Meanwhile, the Israeli military carried out fresh airstrikes in the Gaza Strip earlier on Saturday, killing 2 members of Hamas. That's in response to Friday's rocket attacks on Israel. Well, protests continue across the West Bank and Gaza this Saturday. Things turned violent in some places, with Palestinians hurling stones at Israeli troops who responded with tear gas, rubber bullets and stun grenades. At least 4 Palestinians have been killed. Dozens more have been wounded during these past few days. A little earlier on, France 24's Iris Makler in Jerusalem had this update.
There were protests across the West Bank and in Gaza, actually, but the numbers are decreasing. If we saw thousands yesterday, we saw hundreds today at about 20 sites in the West Bank, from the north to the south, including Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and at the Gaza border too, about 400 people there. So there is less, but they are still intense. They are smaller, but they are still intense. We are still seeing rocks being thrown, fire bombs being thrown, tyres being burnt, Israeli forces responding with tear gas, with water cannon, with rubber bullets, and we've heard reports of live bullets because that's what the Palestinian hospitals say. They see some people injured with live bullets. So we are seeing something that is continuing, but not at the same intensity. And we did, by the way, today also see protests inside Israel, in the Arab cities in the north, in the Galilee, inside Israel itself. By the way, there has also been a call for a day of rage Tuesday, so we may see things escalating again later in the week.
France 24's Iris Makler reporting from Jerusalem. Well, thousands of people took to the streets of Tel Aviv on Saturday evening to protest against alleged corruption in the government. Those taking part vented their anger at the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is currently under police investigation for various graft offences. Well, the Israeli Premier denies any wrongdoing. He says he's being targeted by his political opponents.
Well, the Arab League is holding an emergency session on Donald Trump's controversial decision to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The foreign ministers of 22 Arab countries are meeting in Cairo to try and come up with a unified response to the move by the US president. The Palestinian delegation is calling on the organisation to take urgent action after Trump's policy shift. It has drawn global condemnation and sparked violent protests among Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Funerals have been held for 2 Hamas militants killed in the unrest.
Grief is rarely private in the Middle East. Militiamen with masks and guns patrol through crowds in Gaza City. An angry funeral parade. The dead were killed in airstrikes by Israeli planes. Retaliation for rockets being fired towards Israel from the Gaza Strip. 2 others died during clashes with Israeli forces. Yet the violence remained relatively muted. The real echo has been on the international diplomatic front. This decision is entirely provocation. Let me speak clearly. We will never give our consent to this decision that tramples Muslim and Christian rights on Jerusalem. The United Nations Security Council also stood against Trump's move.
These decisions are unhelpful to the prospects for peace in the region, a name that I know all of us in this council remain committed to.
This was welcomed by Palestinian groups. It's very positive that many countries of the world came out to say that what America has done is not in the interests of the Palestinians nor the Palestinian cause, and not in the interest of the Middle East in general. But anger at Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital has gone global. Demonstrations in London, Athens, Tunis, and Rome. Scenes from around the world echoing the calls of those living at the centre of the tensions, in Jerusalem itself.
Let's go live to Jerusalem and our correspondent Tanya Kramer right now. Now, there have been clashes on the streets of Jerusalem throughout the day, but they were thankfully not as violent as feared. What is the situation in the city right now?
Well, I'm standing here in East Jerusalem. It's rather relatively quiet now. I mean, you see the streets here are almost empty. It's also rather cold, so people are probably staying at home. But we've seen here protests today, especially here in this main shopping street today. And also there were protests, as you've seen in the report, in the occupied West Bank and also in the Gaza Strip, more intensive there, with also dozens of people injured. Now, people here are saying, you know, we have 2 ways of dealing with this. It's either going out on the streets, but they're also hoping that their political leadership will basically come up with some kind of plan and some kind of response to this decision by Mr. Trump.
And one of the responses, of course, is the Arab League meeting, which is taking place right now in Cairo. What exactly are Palestinians hoping for?
Well, we heard officials in Ramallah saying today, and also the Palestinian foreign minister saying that they are hoping for a very strong worded statement, a condemnation by the Arab League. They are hoping also, and I think this is what we have to look at, that there's some kind of maybe action plan. I mean, the Arab League is not really known for going much further than that as a statement. But I think what the Palestinians are hoping for is that they're finding some kind of common response with other countries, what to do next and to decide on the next steps. And they hope, of course, I mean, they see that the US isolated itself with this decision. They hope also to make some impact, for example, when it comes to decisions on the UN Security Council.
That was Tanya Kramer speaking to us there in Jerusalem. Thank you for that.